Hey, this is Editor Howard. We went through a little bit of a nightmare connecting to Exulansic, and then when we finally connected, my Skype crashed, so we missed about a minute or two of Morgan introducing her and asking the initial question that kicked off this amazing conversation. I hope you enjoy it.
Ears so small that for the general public to be aware of it would be a mystery in and of itself. So I think maybe perhaps if it's okay with you, if you could talk a little bit about your initial experience when you come to have that first realization that, or what that first realization is. Is it that you don't feel comfortable in your skin as a female, or you don't conform to a particular stereotype? Maybe essentially, what's the genesis of the first thought or realization that you are in fact, quote unquote, not a woman or not comfortable in your particular skin?
Mm-hmm. So for me, I had a few different things contributing to a general sense of just alienation, feeling like I didn't fit with anybody, any group. And I would point to a couple things from before I got to university, which would be that I am attracted to women, and so therefore identified more with male roles as presented to me in cultural stories, because they're heterosexuals are presented. And so I think it's kind of a natural thing to identify with the person who gets the person that you want, rather than identifying necessarily automatically with the person that is the same sex as you. When you're same-sex attracted. I am also on the autism spectrum, and so that contributed to a sense of not really understanding how conversations unfolded and how social dynamics worked. And an extension of that was gender expectations, and how much that changes when you transition from childhood to adolescence, and your body changes, and then people start treating you differently, and it's have different expectations of you. And it can be very confusing when you're already have a difficult time keeping up with social dynamics, group dynamics, and so therefore you may feel rejected by your people who are supposed to be your peer group, your gender, because gender means category, and so my category was supposed to be the other girls, but I wasn't like the other girls. Bad case of not like other girls syndrome, as the joke goes. But for me, it was very, very. I just felt very alienated. I had a lot of trauma in my early childhood from various places, and so I felt different. And then I got to university. I went to UC Berkeley, which is where Judith Butler teaches and taught at the time. And I had a few experiences in my first couple of years, especially at university, that were very difficult and involved mistreatment by men in my social world. And then I ended up wanting to study gender and women's studies I wanted to study women's studies. I wanted to study women and female body inspectors, the joke, FBI. But no, for real though. I wanted to understand why I was targeted the way I was targeted. I wanted to understand why I was so unhappy as a woman, as a young woman especially, why so many of my friends had similar experiences. And I wanted to study feminism. My mother was a feminist. I wanted to learn more about that. And, I was at university, I had a scholarship, so I was like, I'm going to study what I want to study. But at Berkeley, you couldn't study women without studying gender theory, because they were combined, because women are the second sex, we're the marked class. So if we're going to talk about women, obviously we're going to talk about how women are different from men. So we can't just study women. So we got a lot of gender theory through that. And then once I got that exposure, and my peers were also like kind of having their great trans awakenings too, it was kind of popular. I just kind of fell into that and started pursuing that. And it made me rethink a lot of things and think, well, maybe it's not that women are disadvantaged and mistreated. Maybe it's just that we should change it so that only people that want to be in women's position are in women's position. Maybe that's the great injustice, is that some people who don't want to be treated like women are being treated like women. We can just change. And I was reading Julius Serrano, and he's a trans-identified male author who writes about how essentially the argument of the rest of the book was that cells can change how they respond based on what hormones you take. And so therefore, like, if you take hormones, in some sense, you actually are becoming the other sex. My peers were contemplating surgery. Some of them were getting surgery. I contemplated it for myself. I contemplated the various hormone options for myself. I ended up going with one in particular that was not testosterone, but it can both mimic and suppress and testosterone in your body, as well as suppress estrogen. And so through that hormonal treatment, which is under gender-affirming menstrual suppression, I did feel like it helped me. I felt like I was calmer. I felt like I wasn't as dysphoric is the term. Come to find out, years later, looking back, it's like, well, there's actually physical reasons why women have mood changes throughout the course of their cycle. And so the fact that suppressing those mood changes made me feel better, it didn't mean that I was supposed to be a man. But that's what I thought at the time, was that there's some quality to me, some genetic factor that means that I do better with less estrogen and more testosterone, and so therefore I'm on the transmasculine spectrum is the idea. I had someone I was dating at the time. My girlfriend went to a gender therapist, so she came out to Berkeley, and started talking to me, and I was telling her all these amazing things I just learned about and realized because I had just been exposed basically the year before. And then so she comes to Berkeley. She had just come out as a lesbian, and she was exposed to this and also found it very interesting, and ended up starting to see a gender therapist. Several months went by. During that time, she also was in an accident, had a concussion. So I questioned what role that played. Maybe they should have put the brakes on at that point, but they didn't. And so she ended up getting the top surgery. And at that moment, I feel like, because I was the one that took care of her in the immediate aftermath of the surgery, it was just like, oh, we can't go back now. This is actually, it's one thing to think about things and to imagine things shifting back and forth. But now they're actually gone. Now she's been cut and she can't be uncut. And so it was just kind of like, I think that was the moment where I started feeling like there was a bit of where I was outgrowing it basically. And it got too real for me. But I didn't immediately leave because it was my whole social network, and I'd already come out and I was trans, and so it was a process. But that happened the same year also that I left Berkeley, I graduated in 2011. 2012 is when I started my master's degree at a different university where it was not nearly as steeped in gender ideology as Berkeley, and where my program in particular, the people were great and very supportive. They were just not that interested in talking about my gender issues. And so I got to really have like a social group where that wasn't the focus and it wasn't the topic of every conversation. And so that all of that helped me kind of just progressively, I was getting my own therapy at the time, progressively just outgrow it. I had a non-binary phase as well. But eventually I just kind of moved on with my life. And so that I would put the end point there to be around 2015, 2016, when I really stopped identifying differently at all. And then several years went by before I got onto social media and started talking about it, because I never expected it to become a huge thing.
Yeah, that's what shocks me. Like in a kind of sane world, you would think, well, it wouldn't really be a national issue at all, because it would seem that it's so rare a phenomenon. Maybe I'm misguided, but but it is, from any stats I've looked at, it's a fairly rare phenomenon, and it seems to be increasing as time progresses. And I'm sure that's more to do not with early onset, but rapid onset as well, which is I think what's catching people's attention in Ireland, because our national curriculum will be changing very, very shortly, where we'll have children from primary school age, which is kind of 5 up, who will be taught this as part of the sex education curriculum. There'll be a soft opt-out for parents if they wish to remove their children from the classes. But the problem is it's throughout the entire curriculum. And I think parents are rightly concerned that if this is in the curriculum, especially when you're dealing with young and impressionable minds, which there's an argument to be made, I suppose, against school altogether. But in this particular instance, this will become part of the curriculum, and it's presented to our populace under the guise of care and kindness. And I suppose there is that element. Obviously, if somebody is going through that experience like you've gone through, you would expect that the best care would be there, but that care would initially be the care of a psychologist, and to understand what actually is going on, and to try to prevent things like surgery for as long as is humanly possible. And I find it interesting that when you talk about gender studies and being in that environment, within college, granted you're still a young person, but you're no child,
Right.
So what's that like in that environment? Is it a critical examination of gender studies, or is it pretty much, okay, this is a designated course, and if you do hold any intellectual objections to it, you run the risk of being a pariah? At least that's what's presented when people look at university system now. And when they talk about gender studies at all, especially on the right of an argument, it's almost dismissed as a nonsense, as a cult. It's essentially a cult within the academy. So what's that experience like? Is it a case like, is there real critical examination of the topic itself, or it's essentially an ideology at play?
I think that there can be a critical examination of social trends and why people why cultures of womanhood and cultures of manhood develop in cultures, and you can look at the interplay between the social factors and the accoutrements like makeup and clothing and things like that, and how it relates to sex and physicality, and how it's socially constructed. I think that there is an interesting conversation there, but I also do agree that there's an ideology and a framework where you're expected to come to certain conclusions, and if you don't come to those conclusions, you are kind of seen as being some form of a heretic in a way. And I do agree that there's social contagion and an element to which it's a fad. Something like it's just very, very disproportionate who's getting referred these days in terms of male and female. It's very, very weighted towards females being referred for these gender services and seeking those transitions. And so there's got to be a reason for that. I don't think that, because if you start from the premise that gender is a social construct, why is one sex the one that keeps seeking it out? When you have a system where it's something that's required of other students to participate in, then when a student in a classroom decides that they're trans or comes to that conclusion or otherwise sets down that path, it's a conversion event for the whole classroom, because now the whole classroom is expected to learn all this ideology so that they can perform the rituals correctly, the rituals of using a pronoun that refers to an unseen gender identity rather than the visible sex, and otherwise altering your language so that you're using terms that normally would refer to a differently sexed individual. And so it's just an indoctrination opportunity. Whereas for other ideological groups, other religious groups, the fact that you have religious practices, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can proselytize the other students on class time, which is what I consider this to be. What was it like when I was in the university? It was like I said, you're expected to come to certain conclusions about the nature of gender and the nature of sex and the nature of identity. It's very, very socially reinforced was my experience, and scaffolded. So it's wasn't quite like catechism where it wasn't like that level of indoctrination, but it was just scaffolded to come to the conclusion that there's really not such a thing as a female body or a male body, and actually you don't know anything, and it's all just one big hodgepodge, and we just picked a bunch of random traits and decided this is femaleness, and picked a bunch of random traits and decided this is maleness, and it's the same as race. And so since we understand that sometimes a Black person can have blue eyes, then you have to understand sometimes women can have male genitalia, and it's like that doesn't work. It's not how it works. the traits of femaleness aren't coincidental. That's just not how it works. It's a specific functional ability. All these things have a common cause, but they want to get you to unlearn the reality that femaleness and maleness are functional situations where all these traits are coming from the same tree. It's all fruit of the same tree. They want us to think that like an apple tree could just randomly grow oranges, and it's just not how it works.
Yeah, it's not that simple at all. But the worrying thing then is this moves outside of the university and goes into primary education. Beyond that, in this country, we recently had referendum around redefining what family means. So in our constitution, family is defined as, heterosexual male, heterosexual female, for the production of children, to reduce it to its basic points. And that was to be replaced, and the idea of marriage as well, but that was to be replaced with this idea of a durable relationship, and to change the whole nature and identity of family which can essentially mean anything. And I suppose in one sense it can, because, you get into then silly arguments about, okay, so you don't want two gay people to have children and all this kind of nonsense. But when this goes into the primary system, it's deeply worrying. I look across to Canada, and we see where primary teachers are essentially activists. They're LGBT activists, and they're pushing that ideology on children. And I don't know how true it is. I can't research every story I see, but of children, the parents being reported to Child Protective Services because the child has said in school that they, I don't know how a child would express that they have issues with their gender. I have a lot of small children. Some days they pretend to be boys, other days they pretend to be girls. And so there's
right. And that's the
this
idea.
concern that they're exploring who they are as individuals. To me as a parent, it doesn't really need intervention. And we live in a particularly nanny state here, so I could easily see that get to a stage here, something similar, where a child expresses a wish to be male or female at 5, 6, or 7, and then they get entered into a whole system that's designed to take them through this process of hormonal drugs and eventually surgery. Like it's really fucking horrifying. If it wasn't for the fact that the mental torment that would drive somebody to consider that, it would be safe to say it's horrible. It is horrible. It's awful, really. It's a kind of, it is mutilation when you think of it. If young women are having their breasts removed, and then it goes to bottom surgery as well. So is that the case in the Americas, where children have been referred to social services because schools will take the view?
My state was either recently trying to or did pass a bill where they were. I think this particular one might have been defeated, but it was one where they wanted to make it so that judges had to give preference to the affirming parent. There's cases. There's one out of Montana where I believe the Colstads, where that was a situation where CPS had gotten involved because of a lack of affirmation. And sometimes they're put on this path when they're like 2 or 3. So I've done a lot on Jazz Jennings, and he was diagnosed with the gender identity disorder. This was way back before gender dysphoria was even in the DSM, when he was about 3, because he had said, supposedly, and I think that he was groomed, because everyone has a different version of what exactly he said to do this, and some of them are more believable than others in terms of his the language and speech abilities you would expect of a typical 3-year-old. But he just kind of made these statements, and then they put him on this path. And before he was even a legal adult, they had actually put him through the surgeries where they had permanently sterilized him, permanently removed his sexual function. And that was after years of hormone treatments. Puberty blockers, of course, are also hormones. People talk like they're not hormones, but it's in the name, gonadotropin releasing hormone analogs. Analog drugs of hormones are hormones themselves. So puberty blockers are hormones, and they have hormonal effects, and they suppress other hormones. And so it has a complex effect on the child. And so at some point, the question is, would they have just grown out of it if you didn't disrupt their development? And I believe that in a lot of cases, the answer is yes. But we are trending towards the situation where children are learning about this stuff from their primary school teachers, as you mentioned. They're learning about it from social media. They're learning from other media. Parents are being encouraged to ask their children what their pronouns are today. And so it's all set up so that some children, and it's a natural thing too, for children to experiment and try to see what gets the adult's attention. It's also natural for children to be incorrect. So we're often told, like, well, children can say whether they're a boy or girl by age 3. And so that means that the ones that are incorrect about whether they're a boy or girl are somehow correct. So I would think that if you're incorrect about whether you're a boy or girl, that's a sign that it hasn't fully gelled yet for you yet. Not a sign that you're actually supposed to be the other sex. But somehow we're in a scenario where a child saying something incorrect is seen as like some sort of revealed truth, like divine wisdom. Like we have to worship this little demigod child and do what it wants because it has secret knowledge that we can't access.
No, I have 5 of them, and I can tell you they hold no secret knowledge. You learn a lot about yourself, of how you react to them, but there's nothing. And there's no insider wisdom there. It's all, they need to be controlled. You almost have to become an authoritarian. You need to become an authoritarian, really, to get a handle on it. This freedom thing, I'm trying to figure that out. Giving it to children is just a recipe for chaos and disaster. And it's interesting that
their metabolism.
It's interesting. You said earlier that you were on the autism spectrum, and you mentioned there linguistics and speech development.
Mm-hmm.
So that's got to be concerned as well, because at least the diagnosis of autism in Ireland has shot up over the last 10 to 15 years. So again, if there is that delay, if there's a developmental delay within those children, and then this ideology is there as well, it seems that a lot of these children will be filtered into that kind of grooming, I suppose. It sounds like almost conspiratorial to say it, but what else can you say if you're trying to push children into these identities?
One thing to understand about the increase in autism diagnoses is that they expanded the category significantly in 2013. So when I was diagnosed with a pervasive developmental disorder in 2001, I was 11 or 12. That was not included in autism in those days, and now there was Asperger's syndrome. And in 2013, they expanded the category. So now instead of pervasive developmental disorder being the category, and then the subcategories being autism, Asperger's, not otherwise specified, now autism is the label for the main category, and everything else is subsumed into autism. So I was like promoted to autism in 2013 with the DSM update.
Nice.
And before then, I was considered to be too high functioning to be autistic, and also too high functioning to be Asperger's.
Okay.
They called it autism without the autism.
No wonder you feel rejected.
Yeah, right? Because they still grouped me with the autistic kids for therapy, and I'm like, why am I different? I get that I can talk, but why am I that different?
Don't belong anywhere.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I think it was like 5 to 7% of people who are now considered autistic would previously get the PDD nose diagnosis. And another detransitioner named Laura Becker also got that diagnosis as a kid.
And there is this phenomenon with detransitioning as well. And a lot of those people seem to be vilified as well. So it all seems like a pretty much a clusterfuck.
I got the other day.
Evil, wow, that's impressive.
I was an evil because I had compared my experience watching my girlfriend choose to get top surgery after working with a gender therapist who's older than me, by the way, and said that like I was on the fence about getting it for myself, and so I felt like a penguin waiting to see if the other penguins got eaten by the orca when they jumped in, and so I got called an evil little penguin because I didn't jump in the water to get it, because like I had been told that there were no orcas. I just was skeptical. I thought there were orcas, so I was hesitant to jump in myself. I didn't know that there was an orca for sure. I was a penguin.
Top marks for ingenuity, I guess.
So yeah, the depths to which they'll reach to vilify people that have left, and it's an extension of like they just kind of don't like. I mean, they're angry. They're fundamentally angry at what's happening, and I understand that. I'm angry too. But there's a degree to which they feel like people who left the group need to be held accountable rather than being uplifted and centered. So we should actually be seen as like the evil little penguins that we all are. So I guess
you're essentially you're an apostate, really, aren't you, Mike? Once you're out of the group. Kind of go back to something you said earlier, when you were kind of that search for your identity, and you don't fit into the standard mold of femaleness. So would you describe your kind of personality type as typically masculine, as against feminine?
I would say so. Yeah. I tend generally get feedback that I more confrontational and assertive, I guess. Although they usually use other words for assertive, but that's how I think of myself. And just generally liked more active and rough and tumble things, which a lot of women do, because there's a lot of overlap. But I think that, yeah, I generally would get read as more masculine, despite looking, especially when I was younger, very feminine, in part because I was very thin because of another condition I had that made it difficult to eat until it was corrected. It's called Eagle syndrome. But I think that by doing the trans rights, RITES, I would the right of cutting your hair, the right of wearing a binder, and the right of pursuing more masculine hobbies, even if it makes you feel self-conscious, the right of telling people that you feel more masculine, giving yourself permission to act in ways that feel more natural to you, even if it goes against the anxiety that you have about other people's expectations, that's naturally much more prominent when you're in your late teens and early 20s. That all of those things kind of coalesced into feeling like this was the right path for me. This was going to make me more comfortable. And so, but I found that honestly, as I pursued hobbies and got healthier, I did a lot of like strength training, things like that. And I started to feel like I could express my masculinity in other ways. And I didn't necessarily need to like Play-Doh myself into some simulacrum, some imitation male. So that was part of it too, feeling better in my body.
Yeah, because I think back to when I was younger, kind of school age, we typically be described as a kind of a tom girl, the tom girl behavior. And nothing more.
We would say
really...
tomboy, but it still refers to girls.
All right. Did I say tom girl?
Yeah, you said tom girl, which makes sense because a tomcat is a male cat, so a tom girl would be like a male girl. But for some reason, we say tomboy. It might be a regional thing because we're in.
It's not. I just fucked it up.
I thought I was learning some Irish. Damn it.
No, you're not. You're not. Don't let the accent fool you. I just fucked it up. So tomboy behavior, and that was really it. There was no conception that somebody would change their sex magically by having surgery. So it would seem I would have thought at this day and age that it would just be pretty much accepted that men and women have different personality traits, and that it's okay for a woman to be particularly masculine. But there is this, you mentioned with the rapid onset, that there is this imbalance between females wanting to become or transitioning to male versus male to female. When I see it on the news, it's always male to female for some reason. There's never much talk about the transition from female to male. And what I've noticed with the male to female, it seems to be a lot of guys in their 50s as well, which is deeply worrying, So
right.
I don't know.
You have these late in life transitioners that I think under Ray Blanchard's typology would typically be the people transitioning for reasons of like autogynephilia, where they have a sexual interest in themselves as a woman, and tend to be heterosexual. And now it's contrasted with the homosexual, transsexual in Blanchard's typology of somebody who had been conditioned since like early life trying to be feminine in order to attract the attention of males, whereas the autogynephilic males are trying to attract the attention of themselves. So it's like a different kind of reinforcement, and it can take them in different directions, even though they're both trying to imitate women.
Yeah, and with the girls transitioning to males, do you think this is just going to be put down, reduced to something as simple as just misunderstanding in personality type, or is there a deliberate push?
I mean, I think that there's a deliberate push from people that stand to make quite a bit of money off of these surgeries, because in my country, at least, right now, trans healthcare is conceptualized as like, it's discrimination if a hospital turns away a Black car accident victim because they're Black. And so by analogy, they're saying that it's also discrimination if you don't give somebody a skin tube enhancement. The idea is like that's equivalent, that you're discriminating against them for being trans, even though it's more saying no to a medically unnecessary, extremely expensive and complication riddled boondoggle of these surgeries. But as a result of that model, it's generally covered. So I have several videos where I react to people talking and often showing their medical bills for these surgeries and saying, the one that's pinned to my Twitter right now is this woman who goes by Liam, and she just got a phalloplasty, and she said that it was like $225,000 to get the phalloplasty, and that's where they took her I think her arm skin and they just kind of rolled it up to make like a skin roll up, so that she can stand to pee, because that's like a wholly trans right that's really hard to achieve. It's like one of the top level trans rights, where after that you get to go on the bridge to total freedom and get to the highest level of Mormon heaven. Like it's but of that, she said that she paid about $5,000. So they're paying these incredibly small, like out-of-pocket maximums and getting hundreds of thousands of dollars of surgery. And then often I have one series about this person whose username is Gruffin. And Gruffin had such a hard time. And this was in the middle of COVID too, when like people's cancer surgeries were getting bumped, and you couldn't visit your dying loved ones in the hospital. But she got the phalloplasty, and then like immediately got horrific sepsis and diverticulitis and like bladder stones, and had to be 5 weeks in the ICU and 2 weeks on a ventilator, like in the middle of COVID. Like this was like April of 2021. And since then has had like, I think 8 or 9 other surgeries and a bunch of infections. And it's just like miserable time, and nearing $1 million last time she posted an update about her medical bills.
Wow.
Of which she's had to pay a few thousand. So it's like the fact that it's free is making it more appealing.
Yeah. If only if there was some way for people to see the actual misery that's involved with surgery, because it's not spoken about here on media. You would think it's like going and purchasing a handbag, just to have a penis grafted on. And for the surgeons as well, obviously money, people do, we're not children, people do awful things for money. But the surgeons is bizarre as well. From what I've noticed, there's one particular surgeon in particular, her name escapes me, but to our shame, she's an Irish woman who moved to the States.
Was that Dr. Gallagher?
That could be her. She posts all the images of
Gallagher.
her. Yeah, that's her. Yeah, she posts all the. It's the most fucking disgusting, bizarre thing I've ever seen in my life. It's like parading,
she's like
torture
demon
victims. Yeah, it's fucking incredible. Like so, I know humans can rationalize most things, but it strikes me as I can't think what would other than purely the evil pursuit of money and wealth, what would possess a surgeon to agree to carry those operations out, let alone on adults, but on young children, maybe.
Yeah, like there was someone that reported a video. I reacted to her video. She'd gotten top surgery from Dr. Gallagher. Dr. Gallagher apparently doesn't have any BMI limits, so this person was very obese, and that means you're cutting through a lot more tissue, much larger scars, and wounds, and so and on top of that, the wounds are under much more force from the other flesh that you have, so they're being pulled apart more easily. So it's not good to get a surgery when you're extremely overweight, that you don't need, especially. And so as a result of this, the wound separated, it got infected, and she like called Dr. Gallagher, and she's like, what do I do? And Dr. Gallagher's response was apparently like, it's just a blowhole, you're menstruating, like just was making all these really nasty comments and discouraging her from getting other medical attention. And like, she could have died. The pictures are very like, I don't have a medical degree. I'm not a doctor, but you can kind of see that it's infected. It's not subtle. That is not supposed to look like that. And so I just feel like there's a degree of sexual sadism with these people wanting to do elaborate and destructive genital surgeries on healthy children. Like, I don't understand how you could see it any other way. I mean, I mentioned that in my trigonometry interview too, and they put in the clip even of Dr. Marcy Bowers, the head of WPATH, or possibly now the former head, since the WPATH files came out. It's unclear if he's still the head, but he photographed Jazz Jennings' completely destroyed genitalia after one or possibly two of the botched surgeries that he had, and he photographed it, and he says in front of the parents too, like, "Wow, you could be a porn star for all the photos we've taken of you."
Oh,
and Jazz was a minor. I think it's still at that time. If not a minor, he was still very young. And the first surgery happened when he was definitely a minor. People like to challenge that, but no, it was very well documented. He was 17.
Do people here in Ireland know Jazz Jennings, Morgan?
I don't think so.
They centered a reality show around him for how many years?
The reality show, I think, started when he was about 12 or 13. So that would have been around 2012 or 2013. I'll have to double check when the first episode came out. It's just finished its 8th season about a year ago, and I don't think the 9th season has started yet, but it might be starting.
It's brutal how cynical that whole operation is. A little kid's life, gone.
They were putting him on TV even before the reality show started. You know, one of his earliest experiences was, I think, with Barbara Walters when he was 5. Barbara Walters is a news anchor in the U.S.
Is there any reckoning coming for all of these people, like Jazz's parents, the surgeons involved?
I was really hopeful that we could get some consequences for Jeanette Jennings because of I had an idea, but the statute of limitations has passed and we were not able to do it. But it seems like if Jazz was legally female in Florida, then what happened to him would have constituted female genital mutilation at some point. So it seemed like that could have been. And then of course there was Jeanette's public confession to waking him up and forcing him to dilate and threatening him that she'll do it if he won't do it. Some of which might have been after he was 18, which would make it a little bit more clear that it was a criminal thing to do. So it's a mess. I hope that there's going to be a reckoning. I hope that people are going to wake up and that at least some of these practitioners will face criminal consequences, because I feel like we're not going to necessarily be able to ban it legislatively. I know people are trying to do that and maybe it'll work. But I feel like the better solution is going to be detransitioners taking these doctors to court or to depositions, at least in advance of court, and forcing them to answer a lot of questions on camera in a deposition under oath, and just exposing that they really didn't have any business doing this. Like no matter, you know, whether it was technically legal for someone to do it, like they as individual doctors did not have anywhere near the understanding to be able to do this, and that their whole model of what they were doing was foolish and just exposing them to the point where licenses start getting yanked, and other doctors who are now like, because the demand has exploded, because the referrals have exploded, you have people entering the market who don't have any experience doing this. And so I think that's part of the reason why you get such horrific outcomes is that there's people who just want to make money quickly. And they know that there's not really any genuine standard of care here.
Whew. If we as a society still agree that what Dr. Mengele was doing in the concentration camps, then I think the logic should extend to these people.
Yeah. And also some of the lawsuits that are underway in the U.S., like Prisha Mosley, for instance, is someone that I know, and she's suing her doctors. And some of the documents that have come out, like they apparently billed the insurance company for a breast reduction rather than for like a top surgery. And she was told she might have some difficulty breastfeeding, but like she actually obviously was not going to be able to breastfeed. after that. And so she and I believe she was also she was at least a minor when she was started on the hormones, and it's just a mess. And other detransition lawsuits are coming out with similar things where the doctors were like, playing a bit fast and loose with how they were billing things and what the consent documents say. I also have looked at a lot of these consent documents myself for the hormone therapies, looking to see how many of them mention the cancer risk, because testosterone and estrogen are teratogens and carcinogens, and so they're specifically carcinogens. Testosterone's a teratogen. I'm not sure about estrogen, but testosterone definitely is. And so they're these consent documents, they generally either don't mention a risk of cancer, or when they mention it, they only mention, say, liver cancer, as though that's the only kind of cancer that a sex hormone that has receptors all over the body, all over the brain, in differing amounts, that it would only cause liver cancer. And that's because they've been forced to do that. And I think part of the reason, the WPATH files, some of those documents that came out were that the hormone therapies were causing liver tumors.
If the parents, not to blame parents for children, but there is this question around parents of people like Jazz Jennings. People make a connection with Munchausen by proxy with a lot of these parents. With your parents, if you don't want to answer, don't. But your parents, when you were going through this, were they like generally supportive of you? Did they try to talk you out of it? Not to draw comparisons between your parents, who I don't know with Jazz Jennings, but I'm just interested to see, because I'm trying to think from my point of view, if my daughter, who's 15, came to me and said she was, thinking about transitioning, well, first of all, I would be shocked, and then I would say, well, no, while you're under my guidance, let's call it that, that simply won't happen, and we'll go and get you therapy. Let's essentially talk about it. So did you get that reaction from your parents? Is it not a conversation you have with them at all, or they just go, listen, darling, whatever you need, we're here to support you?
My parents, I would describe both of them as being accepting, but not encouraging of it. No, I think that they were fully tolerant of me dressing differently. They expressed curiosity about it. And I remember my mother in particular being like, I mean, it's okay to dress differently sometimes, but like, she kind of was like, well, put some brakes on. You don't need to rush through this, reminding me of like, who I was basically. So I wasn't necessarily thrilled at the time. I did have kind of like a reaction like, you're like those evil people they warned me about, but she's not. So I just kind of like, I do appreciate that in retrospect, that she was accepting, but not affirming in the same way. And we'd all been through a lot together, me and my mom and me and my dad. And so it was, I think that they both kind of understood that like I had struggles and I was searching for meaning given my age. And so they never withdrew support. No. But they also never like indulged it too much. Like they tolerated it. I was still, of course, welcome at gatherings and such.
So then to compare that with, say, the parent of someone like Jazz Jennings, who parades them, it almost reminds me of those beauty pageants for children that a lot of parents seem to put their children through as well. This kind of pageantry and the connections with Munchausen's by proxy. Have you looked into that much, or have you done much research on that phenomenon?
I have looked into that phenomenon, and I do think it seems pretty applicable here, because they supposedly, according to everybody, they all have different versions of what exactly he said, and as I said, some are more believable than others. But it was all some essence of him coming up at age 2 or 3 and saying, "I, a girl." And so the Grandma Jackie has a whole spiel in one episode where she's like, he didn't say I want to be a girl. He said, "I, a girl," which means I am a girl. So that means he knew he was a girl, and just on and on. And it's like, or he was 2 and he couldn't accomplish that language function. Maybe that's more probable. And then Jeanette's version is that Jazz came running up and said, when is the good fairy going to turn my penis into a vagina? And I'm like, I don't think he said that.
Wow,
I
that's
don't
pretty
think he said
advanced.
that, Jeanette. I think he tried to get him to say that. I think he said part of it to some other people, but everyone else's version is not quite as detailed. And then the gender therapist, who's a total piece of work, who had like these dolls with they're basically like Cabbage Patch dolls, but anatomically accurate. And she supposedly asked him to point to the one that he was, and he pointed to the incorrect one. And they were like, "Wow, that means that we need to cut you." And so she's, so that's how it is. And so her version of events, she tried to like insert speech errors, but she kind of like the error pattern that she tried to apply to what Jeanette had told her, like it wasn't developmentally typical. Her errors were on earlier developing sounds, but supposedly in imitation, Jazz was making the later developing sounds more correctly than the earlier ones. And so I'm like, I just don't believe you, lady. I don't believe you. And then they brought her back when he was like 13 for a whole conversation about like his budding sexuality after he was already on the puberty blockers, which he said made him stop having crushes, or that he stopped having crushes mysteriously after he started the puberty blockers. Let me put it that way. He didn't directly link them, but that came out in the most recent episode I reacted to, which was in the first season.
Yeah, one of the puberty blockers that uses is that Lupron, is it?
Yeah.
I've heard of that, and that's the same chemical that's essentially used to chemically castrate sex offenders, yes?
There's a few they've used over the years. So Lupron is one. It acts on the brain and turns off the hormones that activate your gonads, which then turn off the gonads production of the sex hormones, and thereby lowers like all the hormone levels, including hormones most people don't think about, which like luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormones, which have other effects in the body besides just the gonad ones. So people, you're choking it off upriver, not knowing what complications this will have to the brain's functioning across the lifespan and its degradation at the end of life. So you have that one. They've also used progesterone, such as Depo-Provera, to castrate sex offenders. That works very similarly to GnRH analogs. It acts on the same glands in the brain and suppresses those intermediary hormones as well as the gonad function, which is why it's used in gender-affirming menstrual suppression as well as for birth control. And they've also tried using estrogen to castrate sex offenders, which apparently also kind of works.
Yeah, that's a nice pair right there. Like I, it's just hard to fathom that people accept this, and
yeah, they don't know what they're accepting. They buy into the idea that it's possible to change sex, and they're really invested in the idea that like, my gender identity wouldn't mislead me, and so they're willing to accept that first, and then they're already kind of like buying the used car. And so when they find out that buying the used car is going to significantly shorten their lifespan, it's going to increase the risk of heart attack, it's going to increase the risk of cancer, they're already sold on the car. They don't want to hear it. And so they want to argue with me about, like, I've had people say, well, I'd rather live one day in my genuine, authentic self than live 30 years without cancer. And I'm like,
yeah, good luck finding your authentic self.
Your authentic self is a tumor.
Fucking hell.
Yeah, you touch upon something interesting. This enlightened divinatory state. Like, I don't think anyone really has found that genuine self, the pristine, untouched identity that we all secretly have somewhere. I still, on some
I keep mine
primitive...
in a Horcrux.
Sorry?
I keep mine in a Horcrux. You'll never find it.
Yeah.
On a visceral level, a childish level, I guess, I kind of believe in something similar to that. But this is all in the realm of religion, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe that this is a religious movement disguised as a medical treatment. Although they're removing, like you mentioned a psychologist earlier, there's something called the informed consent model now, because trans has been constructed as an identity category, where we've kind of like removed the idea that even that it's a disorder. And now the model is that the only disorder is the fact that they don't have access to the transitioning. And then once they have access to the transitioning, all the other problems are just going to go away. I mean, I've seen people even attribute say that we shouldn't limit autistic people's access to care. And, you know, there's an argument for that. You know, maybe we shouldn't limit people who have capacities access to care just because they're autistic. I think he's right there. But he's saying, like, we shouldn't limit it even when the autism is caused by the gender dysphoria. And I'm like, oh, that's not what? So there's an idea if we can just fix the gender dysphoria, if gender dysphoria is present, it's automatically primary, and therefore we shouldn't explore how it might be secondary to other things that might go away once those other things are addressed, like trauma, like social reasoning difficulties due to autism, which can be treated. They're very treatable. The symptoms of autism can be improved, even though the autism is a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition. But you can absolutely improve your level of functioning with therapy and treatment, and that's one thing I do for a living is working with people like that as a speech language pathologist, helping them to with the social reasoning, which falls under something called pragmatic language, meaning how do we use the words that we have socially to achieve goals. You know, that's a very difficult thing when you're on the spectrum and have a difficult time modeling other people's perspectives while you're also modeling your own. So it's challenging. So but if you can treat those other things, maybe the preoccupation with being something you're not will go away. Maybe if we just wait for the brain to finish developing, the difficulty people have with the fact that some parts of their body are more sensitive than other parts. I think that's a big part of it and why autism is so prevalent here. It's the social piece, but it's also that when you have a sensory processing difference, one manifestation is that it takes you longer to adjust for the fact that some parts of your body are more sensitive than others. And so you end up being distracted and preoccupied by parts of your body. And you might start thinking, you know, I'd be better off if I just didn't have genitals, if I just didn't have breasts. I'd just be better off because they're very distracting. I'm thinking about them all the time. And I don't like how they feel so sensitive. I hear that a lot in these videos of people talking about why they got top surgery, why they chose not to keep their nipples, for instance.
I haven't heard of that. That's shocking. And in those instances, but after the surgery, like, does it give any relief in that sense? I can't imagine how it can.
Well, a lot of them end up with phantom nipple pain. So I call it perpetual purple nurple.
Oh my God.
I'm not kidding. It's multiple documents. Like the purple nurple purgatory is one of my episodes about one in particular that I really identified with. I even included a video clip of me in college arguing with some people on Sproul because she and I just looked similar. We had a similar affect, I thought. But she had her breasts removed. She had her nipples removed because she was talked into having her nipples removed by the salesman doctor who told her it'll be cheaper and they won't randomly fall off during recovery, which is going to make you puke. And so she's like, I was afraid of puking. She had a metaphobia. She was afraid of puking. And so she therefore literally sold her nipples.
Huh?
And then ended up feeling like her nipples were being pinched all the time. And other creators have been like, this is what I have to do to deal with this. I stand in front of a mirror and I pretend to pinch where my nipple used to be. Well, dysphoria cured. Thank God you don't have to worry about your breasts anymore.
I shouldn't laugh, but it's so fucking absurd. Like,
yeah. And how are you going to have a job when you have to do that every 20 minutes to deal with the phantom pain? Like, how's that going?
That's probably. Sorry, I'm just saying that's probably one of the lesser problems. If you consider bottom surgery and all the horrors that go along with that as well. Yeah,
there was another person who now is a detransitioner who testifies about it. Is really awesome person. Goes by a shapeshifter, but I first became aware of his work because he was putting out videos trying to explain his horrible experience with vaginoplasty, and then it like failed and like shriveled up basically, and there was just no depth and no width, and the tube scarred to itself, and then they tried to go in and fix it by taking a piece of his colon and attaching that, but then that also wasn't like working well, and then he couldn't dilate, and so he went back to get dilated under anesthesia, which to me seems like a terrible idea. But they did it, and that resulted in a fistula, which he discovered because it was a rectovaginal fistula or neovaginal fistula. So that meant that when he went to pass gas, gas went out the wrong way. That's how we found out that he had this injury from the doctors dilating him under anesthesia. So it's just like, obviously that creates a lot of infection risk.
There's no going back from there.
No, yeah, there's no going back. So he tries to make content talking about the fact that he can't get that back now, and it's a constant negative like drain on his life and his enjoyment of his quality of life.
Yeah, it's pure torture. There's no other word for it.
Another interview with a woman who went by Ryan James, and Ryan had a phalloplasty, and I became aware of Ryan because she had made a video where she had talked about her how it ruined her life. And when I talked to her, she had to get like a what are they called? A colostomy bag. In order to try to reduce the frequency of her severe infections, because she had like a rectovaginal urethral fistula, like a superfistula, I think. And so in order to try to fix that, they just like removed the passage of fecal matter through that area. But she was still getting like infections. Like I think she said she had like 5 or 6 infections, which could become septic, as they did for another person that I reacted to named Ruby Farah. And I reacted to his video, and he was like interested in it, and we had a whole back and forth. And then a few months later, he was found like cold, gray, and lifeless due to sepsis, barely survived, thank God. But 50% of people who get sepsis have post-sepsis syndrome, and post-sepsis syndrome can kill you years later. Like it can cause a progressive deterioration of structures that were damaged, that were necessary for maintaining the structure and function of your brain. And so I've known people who had sepsis. I know a person in particular who developed narcolepsy, and that the narcolepsy became so severe that he just died from the inability to dream, basically, and some other factors. And so it's just, and other things too. I suspect lung damage contributed to the lack of ability to respire, but it's just these are not small things. No. And most people who've only been healthy in their life, they can't understand how bad it gets. Like they just can't even model it. They have no idea how badly their life can get, how low their function can get without them dying. And that can just be their life now. No idea.
Yeah, because it sounds to me like if you can imagine I'm going to transition and you're the person I see before I finally signed the papers and give my consent, my informed consent, which I would consider what you've been telling us would be needed as part of any informed consent, because you would have to know what the actual drawbacks of this surgery are. That would need to be. No one in the right mind could go, okay, well, yeah, sure, I'll gamble on the risk that I feel better about myself, because if I'm not mistaken, there's the suicide numbers of people who've transitioned is pretty much on a par with those who don't, or maybe is actually higher.
That's my understanding. Yeah, is that the risk either stays the same or goes up is generally the finding.
Yeah, but just in simple terms, you could think if that's your daily fucking existence, like if you had issues beforehand,
right?
How you view your body and your mental state now, with that on top of it, and then even just to find a partner, like, because essentially your life is pretty limited, and probably the only outlet you have at that stage is to, go and preach and try to dissuade others from going down the same path, like. And because I know in our education system that won't be discussed. It will be, okay, here's the curriculum, and it's essentially will focus around support and care, quote unquote, for people who are going through that. And I'm sure they'll discuss the options of hormone treatment and surgery to make the person feel better about themselves. Again, if this is aimed at primary school children. Mm-hmm. But there will be no talk or no conversation around the drawbacks. There'll be no critical discussion about it. I see that with my own child and her peer group. They're all kind of 15 to 16, 2 years out from finishing secondary school. So they'll leave and then go on to college from there. So I asked my daughter what, about the lessons that she's involved in school and what the conversations are like. And there's no conversation. It's essentially the teacher saying this is what's written in the book, and they'll get an exam on it. It's essentially rote learning, and then they will have to repeat back what the lesson is about. And I asked her, like, well, what do you think about it? Like, and so she will actually express her opinion to me. Maybe she won't. Maybe she tells me what I want to hear as well. But the general impression I get is that none of them really want to talk about it. They don't feel comfortable talking about it at all. But thankfully, they don't take it really too seriously. And that's my kind of experience of schooling as well. Maybe that's because I never fit in school to begin with. So the likes of horror will be fine, but it is those people who are actually vulnerable, and I think people who will be on the spectrum. And there does seem to be a preponderance of people who are on the spectrum that are transitioning, but that's deeply worrying. So I think we've got to be very, very thankful for people like yourself and others who are bringing it to public attention, because it's not an easy thing to do. You're essentially going against the grain. You're public as well. We're here hiding in the darkness with our voices, but you've actually put yourself out there, and that's no small fucking thing. Because it seems a particularly militant movement as well. And I know you were involved in the feminist movement as well. And so it's interesting from my perspective, because I know there's trans exclusionary feminists.
So they've been going the last few months. They're not happy. I was photographed with a male who was wearing a dress, and so they have not been happy with me for the last few months at all.
Okay,
I've been ridiculous. The CRA.
It just seems so fucking bizarre, that you have a middle-aged man in a dress trying to tell women what it is to be a woman. Like it seems to devalue womanhood altogether, to think that, okay, well, you can just put on a costume, have a feeling. I'm not somebody who's suffering dysphoria. I'm thinking more of the guys who get a sexual kick out of it, or so. There's got to be some level of pathology. I know it's very unfashionable to talk about pathology when it relates to gender, but I don't think society is really in a, let's call it a safe space to say, okay, well, there is an element here of pathology that needs to be dealt with, and that seems to be absent from the conversation altogether. Maybe people can't go there because it brings up images of asylums of the past, and sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it was sold to us as the idea that there's a group of people who are terminally mentally ill, and they have this very high likelihood of ending their lives. And they will otherwise be deeply unhappy every second of every day unless we let them do this. And so we should. And that's how it was sold to us. But now it's been rebranded as the separate identity category, as though there's always been a contingent of people that had to transition for like some sort of physical reason. And then on top of that, with the non-binary patch that came out, now it doesn't even need to be a lifelong thing. And now it doesn't need to be that you're transitioning from female to male. Now it's just about like you can be non-binary if you're transitioning from female to not female, which is why they get like the unusual surgeries, like they're starting to do, for instance, phalloplasties where they don't actually do any vaginectomy. So it's like and vice versa, so that people can end up with like two different things at once. Or the nipple removal has also been cited as a reason, because they're like, well, men and women have nipples, so if I'm non-binary, I should have no nipples. I mean, we're not talking about people who have the clearest like state of mind, in my opinion. But you're not allowed to even suggest that somebody who decided that they were, or realized somehow that they should transition during an active, confirmed, acknowledged manic episode. You're not allowed to link those. You're not allowed to suggest that maybe this person might have been wrong because they had a bright idea in the midst of a known confirmed episode. So you're not allowed to say that. So I commented on that in one video and it got removed from YouTube very quickly, because you're just not allowed to link that. It's hate speech now, to suggest that sometimes people who are mentally ill have ideas that are incorrect.
Do you have hate speech laws where you reside at the minute?
We don't have hate speech laws, but if you are considered to have done hate speech during an actual crime, then you can get like a hate crime enhancement if they infer that you did it because you did the crime because of the hate that was reflected in your speech, which I think is similar to how it works in the UK.
Yeah, we're currently we're probably maybe a month out from our government introducing hate crime legislation, which they haven't defined what hate is, which is useful. Of course, they're going to leave it up to the courts to decide this. But we essentially have a government who's fully on board with this ideology, which is amazing because we have a government that's made up of supposedly people on the left, people on the right, people on the centre, and everybody has the same ideology around transitioning children. We because it's Ireland here, maybe you're not familiar with Ireland, but we don't do a lot of things well, like infrastructure and forward planning and things like that. I'm sure it's not restricted to Ireland. But as far as trans kids are concerned, we didn't have the facilities to deal with them internally in Ireland, so we shipped them over to the Tavistock Institute in the UK, which subsequently was closed down. So yeah, for us here, it's almost impossible to raise any objection to it without being labelled as either a bigot or a member of the far right, and that really it's the most uncaring thing you can do is to actually object to it, and because you get labelled straight away.
Yeah, and the when you are public, as you mentioned that, like you attract people who want to like expose you and figure stuff out. So I had a group of people who like. They managed to go all the way back to my time at Berkeley, and they found a research project that I'd gotten some grant for that involved a group called the Minutemen, and they basically hang out on the border and try to like count the number of immigrants crossing at unauthorized points and otherwise have their little ideological group. And so I'd gone down to do an ethnographic study on them because I consider the work that I'm doing with reacting to these and compiling these surgical narratives and things like that to fundamentally, I'm trying to capture a cultural moment in a particular subgroup. So it's an ethnographic project, but it is also is an activist and a political project too. So it's but anyway, so they found that and they're like, she's been hanging out with the far right since college.
Oh. By association is wonderful.
She drifted Berkeley.
Yes, and you may know a Jewish person as well. God forbid. Like.
I'm an extremely evil penguin. I'm the worst penguin you've ever met in your whole life.
Yeah. The penguins. Penguin was all. I'm just thinking of penguins now, but what wasn't that used as part of the argument around same-sex attraction?
Oh yeah.
There was an argument put forth that there's no animals in the animal kingdom that are homosexual apart from was it penguins? Am I imagining that, or was that the case?
I think that there was a set of gay penguins and that there was a children's book written about it.
All right, yeah, okay, yeah. It just fascinates me. Like I think most men anyway would fuck a sex toy. Let's face it.
Well, birds are just weird. Like I've done a few videos on the species of birds called rough birds. And what's fascinating about this population or this species is that they have subtypes of males that are controlled by a super gene, meaning like a cluster of genes that get passed on together. It's kind of similar to the Y chromosome, but birds don't have a male Y chromosome. Females have what would be the equivalent of a Y chromosome. So it's just opposite of humans because they're birds. But they have these super genes that pass on, and the super gene determines what the male looks like. There's 3 categories, and then also what the male's mating strategy is. And there's the main most common male type, which are the independents, I think, and then there's the satellite males. The independents like they mate with females and they form like long-term pair bonds. The satellite males try to get in on the independent females, because the satellites males, they look a bit different and they're not as territorial as the independents. So that's where they're called satellites. And then for like 20 years of studying this colony of birds, the scientists didn't realize there was a third subtype, because the third subtype evolved to look like females and to behave like females until the last possible moment, and then to jump in between a mating pair. Just take their shot and receive from the other males whatever happened, but that's their opportunity to pass on their genes. And it was a mutation in testosterone metabolism, similar to how some humans have testosterone mutations where they end up looking very female. So
that
it's just
pretty much answers all my questions right there.
well, I feel like they look different now, but there's no reason they couldn't, like, if they evolved and had a different like pattern where my belief is that humans, males and females, we don't look that different compared to some species because we're very cooperative, and because most of the time when we have kids, it's consensual. So we pick people that kind of look like us, that don't feel like they're too different from us, and we live in groups where we don't move too much for most of our history. But there could have been a time before all that where we were different, and there were these subtypes that evolved, and then maybe it's just hidden now. Like I don't know. It seems like that would be plausible, because we do know that there are even some of those differences now. They're generally considered medical conditions, but in this bird species, it's like a stable thing, and they've been like this for, like, I think 20 times as long as humans have been a species. They've been doing this for a while. But they're called fader males, and the scientists called that behavior of jumping in between the mating pair as the sandwich. I love behavioral science; it's great. Animal cognition.
Can I briefly touch on not a question, but an observation from a listener? Because and it's good, because I'd like to touch on this whole gender thing a little further, because honestly, I'm not entirely sure what it's all about myself. So he says that an African tribe, excuse me, I'm getting a little nervous here. Sorry, I've been watching you online for over a year. Talking to you makes me nervous. So this African tribe circumcises males because they see the foreskin as the female part, or the most feminine part of the male, and it needs to be cut off basically to make the man, super masculine. So he takes from this the idea that this practice of circumcision, which is all around the world, it's pretty popular still in the United States, in the UK it is as well. He says that this is oversimplified the idea of masculinity to the point of natural masculinity, which involves a certain anima, which involves a feminine side, as it were. So we have this, you know what, I'm butchering it because I'm so nervous. I'll read out his comment. Because of that, I suspect that the conception of gender of the circumcised male mind is so simplistic that natural male femininity is interpreted as being female rather than anima within male, the natural yin side of the male.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that, and that's going back to one of the earlier questions about whether there's a good side of studying gender, and I think having the insight that gender and sex are on different levels of analysis is really important, because when you conflate them and try to say that womanhood is anybody that acts womanly or looks womanly, that's where you get these errors where you're like, oh, I need to make sure that I have no womanly parts, or else I'm slightly womanly, but I want to be a man, and I can't be a man if I'm at all womanly. And so it can be frustrating. Whereas if you have that insight, then maybe you can relax a little bit about what your sex is, and play around with gender as a term for a category of things that aren't sex but are associated with sex. The problem is that the sex is not gender people are often actually pushing an idea that sex is gender, and that's why we need to cut kids.
It's astounding that these are the people who aren't progressive. These are the people who are solidifying male and female, probably without even realizing that they're reinforcing gender stereotypes. Are they? Right, yeah. Is there any self-awareness there? Do they address that at all?
I think that there's not. I think that when you're part of a religious ideology and you're so fundamentalist, you're willing to actually cut flesh to prove your faith, that you have to have accepted inherently contradictory things. And it just kind of breaks your ability to rationally acknowledge true things. Like, well, if genitals don't define gender, why do you need to cut your genitals to prove your gender? How does that make sense?
Yeah, it doesn't. But I think you're right with the religiosity element, and it's almost it's kind of Gnostic to me. There's that Gnostic notion to transcend the male and female, and I think in one of the Bible passages, I think it's the Secret Sayings of Thomas or something like that. But there's a passage that mentions that Christ will return, Christ in the sense that the person themselves becomes Christ. That archetype returns when the male becomes female and the female becomes male, into this new emergent being. So I think there's, it's boring, and of course it links back, I think, to the ideology as well. I know it's almost a trope at this stage to mention Marxism, and Freud as well. And so that's a lot of the people who are at the forefront of this ideology come from that particular background, and it's almost impossible to have a rational discussion about it at this stage in the game, because it's all almost parody at this stage between conversations between the left and the right. It's almost like we've got commies under the bed again. But I think we need to have these conversations around the genesis of these movements and ideologies, so people have almost a vaccine against it in the future, because you're obviously well educated. Most people aren't. Let's just be honest, and wouldn't have any real notion of what's going on with anything in the world. But I think people, maybe it's not for the general public to in their interest to talk about these things, but I think we have to examine the roots of these ideologies, the people who were involved, and the fact that a lot of them were pathological in nature. When I think the likes of Foucault and people like that.
Foucault, Mr. Lower the age of consent to infancy.
Yeah, I suppose.
I think he might have had some issues. I suspect. But it's not even just like the pathology that leads them into it that's not being addressed, but all the pathologies that are going to result from these interventions. They've done MRI studies on people before and after hormone therapy, and they found multiple studies have found that the combination estrogen and anti-androgen treatment for men, it causes their brain to shrink at a significantly accelerated rate compared to what you would expect just from normal aging. And it was visible in like a few months. And I think one of them estimated that it was 10 times the rate that they would expect from just normal aging. And that's significant, and so one of those studies concluded in, I think, 2006 that, the brain is feminizing because women have smaller brains. So if the brain's shrinking, it's feminizing. Dementia is the most feminine illness. And then the other one that repeated the study and replicated the findings was like, it's definitely smaller, but we're not going to say it's feminized. It's definitely smaller.
Women's brains are smaller than men's. Yeah, God, what a way to go around to get to that fucking conclusion.
The idea that makes the men's brains feminine and not just like damaged. Like
I don't know. Phrenology back is
sensor and changes like the size and shape of the women's brains in terms of bigger. And it's like, well, your skull is only so big. So is this going to cause any problems? Are we going to like have any sort of like mild herniation down out of the foramen magnum, which is what normally happens when your brain starts getting too big for the skull? That's the only place for it to go. So if you get a head injury and your brain swells, it goes down the foramen magnum and you stop breathing. It's not good. So it's like, why are we giving them a drug that's like, do we know how this is going to affect them? Do we know what sort of tumors it's going to cause? Like, people are in when I was in that community, and my ex-girlfriend too, other people, they thought the same thing. We really thought that we were just adopting the male risk profile, like that we were that naive, and that's what we were being told. So it seemed like, okay, we're just making a trade, we're making a deal. But the reality is that once you're exposed to a carcinogen, you are permanently at an increased risk of that. And so you are not just trading, you are adopting a new risk profile on top of the risk profile you already have from the sex that you are. And It's also not just their profile. It's like with testosterone and heart attacks is a great example, because they have a higher, females who are on testosterone have like twice the risk of men and 4 times the risk of women of having a heart attack. You're not just trading. You're not just getting the men's risk.
It's Frankensteinian, all of this.
Yeah. I mean, women have smaller everything, and it's not a function of height. We're not short men. Everything is smaller, even at the same height, in terms of your vasculature. And another example, like our red blood cells are the size that they are. So things aren't necessarily scaling like it's Photoshop. Like the fact that you're smaller actually means that some things are more likely to happen. Like there's a reason why men tend to have more red blood cells than women. Like, and therefore they have different athletic abilities in various capacities. And it's our blood vessels are smaller. People with dwarfism who are even smaller than women, like their risk of heart attack is much higher. The risk of having those kind of events is higher because we don't scale. Things don't just scale like in Photoshop. You can't just shrink and expand and have it be the same thing. People who are really tall, for instance, they also have higher risk of cancer just because they're tall and other problems because they have more cells. So any given cell could become cancerous. So it's just like it's not a simple matter of switching teams, and it's not a simple matter of like, well, we'll just give them the drugs to make them a bit taller and it will have no effects because other people get tall with no problems. It's not how it works.
I'd like to, I know we have you for an hour and a half so far, so at any time, feel free to tell us to fuck off and leave you alone. But with you mentioned feminism, so you describe yourself as a feminist. Would it be safe in that assumption?
Yes.
Okay. So the general perception of feminist is, the angry, screaming, shouty feminist who hates men. So I want to ask you a rather simple question. Just your view on men, like, so as a woman, as a man, this is just to put my own mind at ease, like, so as a man, and I'm not alone in this, men and masculinity, it seems like it's pretty much under attack. It has that label of toxic masculinity. And I can understand how women would naturally be, terrified of men. But for no other reason than we're simply more physically powerful by and large. So at any stage, if shit does hit the fan, well then, the might is right rule tends to kick in, and a male can physically overpower a female when push comes to shove.
Right.
So the question, is there, as a woman, is there a natural fear of men? And if there is, I think that men and women could probably come to a reasonable understanding that most men are terrified of other men as well. And so,
you're way more at risk of violence for men than women are. Like there's a perception that women are more at risk of violence for men. No, men fight each other, and sexual violence is the only kind of violence that we're more at risk of. And on an absolute level, you're more likely, men are more likely to get hurt by other men than women are likely to get hurt by men. But the thing is that when we get hurt by men, it's a totally different scenario. And so it's just they're not directly comparable. And it's not generally not as much of a mutual fight, but men also get attacked by other men, and it's not mutual either. I have a father, I have a brother, I have a grandfather, I have uncles. I don't consider myself somebody that thinks that current men must be held accountable for all of history, and that like you played a role in it because you're also male. And I think that trying to study, for lack of a better term, evolutionary psychology, and to understand that there are different selective pressures on men and women and different histories there that make us more and less prone to things. I do think that, and I think this is backed up like psychologically, that women are more prone to things like anxiety. And I think that there's a logical reason for that. It's if we are more cautious, we might be less likely to, face violence and more likely to get our children into adulthood and things like that. And you have behavior trend differences between males and females, but I also do firmly believe that there's subtypes of problematic males, and not all males have the same propensity. And you can use your judgment. You can, recognize that as is on a society-wide basis, we do need to account for the fact that some males are predators. Predators are way more likely to be males than females, and male bodies break down sooner. And so if you have a 50-50 split, the odds that you're going to have males that are closer to the end of their lifespan, they're going to be a larger fraction. And so there's problems that come with that when you're nearing the end of your lifespan, or you have other issues. So I think that there needs to be a mindset of fairness and a mindset of understanding that we're all limited. I have this kind of conversation a lot with certain other feminists I've had this conversation with, where they're resistant to my position that there's biological factors driving these differences between male and female rates of being predatory and being criminal. And that's not to say, well, if it's biological, we need to excuse that. But like, I don't think you can explain it entirely with reference to individual conscious choice. Because if we agree that males are more likely to do this, the two options are either that you think that the heart of man is like corruptible in some way and evil, or you can take the position that we're biological creatures and we have different like genetics, different hormone profiles, and we're all kind of doing the best we can given our biological limitations, and we can account for that and talk about it. I understand the anger. I think that it's also important for women to have space to feel and process the anger that they have for ways that they've been treated by specific men in their history, and ways that their life has been limited by cultural attitudes towards women and girls. I just think that there has to be room for that, but at the same time, I don't think it's helpful to promoting a systems-based understanding, like thinking about it in terms of mechanistic kind of parts that keep self-replicating. Like that's the kind of the radical feminist analysis, that the biological differences give rise to the oppression of women and the marginalization of women. Get too wrapped up in blaming individual men who are alive today. I think that you can end up losing sight of that larger analysis. And what I find to be much stronger arguments for separating males and females. Because if you believe that males could choose not to do it, that all of them, population-wide, that they could choose not to do it, why not mix the sexes? Why should we separate them? But if you understand that any sufficiently large enough population of males is going to have some problematic males in it, and it's bad for both groups to mix them so that they have more opportunities to enjoy violating women, because the problematic men, they enjoy it. That's why they do it. It feels good to them. And yeah, there's a lot of anger at that. But at the same time, what feels good to you is very, very chemically controlled and can shift in terms of if you have a mental illness, if you're on certain drugs. A lot of Parkinson's drugs makes gambling feel really good to some people. And they develop pathological gambling from the drug they were prescribed for Parkinson's, but never had that problem before. Like you can change your reaction to things, and it's just do we want to have an actual theory of everything, or do we want to process our emotions? Like, what do we want to do right now? What's the actual goal of this conversation?
So what's the end game for feminism and masculinity? Because it seems like if it is such a big problem, like if it is biological, if it can't be quote unquote overcome, it seems to me the only way to control it is to have an overarching tyrannical control system set up for men to save us from ourselves and women. And there doesn't seem to be.
I think most men can overcome the maleness. I believe in men. But I believe that if something happens to you and those factors are removed, and I grew up around a man who had experienced a brain injury, and had worked with a lot of other people who've experienced brain injury since then as an adult. It's like we have evolved as a species to the point where we can overcome our baser drives and instincts. But if something happens and you can't do that anymore, those higher capacities are gone. Those lower instincts and drives and differentials take over. And that's where you see the difference in behavior, I think. So I think it's a matter of having reasonable precautions to prevent that violence, to prevent the burden of trauma on women. And then also basically identifying and tagging the problem males and either getting them into whatever kind of treatment they might need that might help them, and otherwise holding them criminally accountable for that behavior and preventing future recidivism. But I don't think that hashtag not all men. I don't necessarily think all men are evil or likely to do that, even if they become ill. But I don't know what it is that drives some men to be like that. It does seem to run in some families also. I think the Mandalay Bay shooter's dad was like a diagnosed psychopath too.
Yeah, it strikes me as kind of odd, especially with feminism, at least in Ireland. I'd associate feminists with kind of left-wing politics, and we have a kind of worrying scenario here in Ireland at the moment on many levels with immigration. Of all things, who would have thought that we would have a problem with immigration in Ireland rather than emigration as it's historically been. But we have like a verifiable increase in sex crimes on women with the recent numbers of immigration, which you would, of course, if you bring more people into your population. Well, then by extension, everything will increase. But the numbers are, almost exponential. Like it's really unheard of in Ireland for a woman to be murdered by a man. The numbers are very, very low. And the same with sexual assaults and rapes. The numbers comparatively to Europe and Western civilization are relatively lower, have been. But in the last 5 years, as the numbers of immigrants have increased, and again, largely from African and Islamic countries with cultures that plainly don't respect women in the same way that Western culture does. They simply don't. So we've had real numbers of women, increases in rapes, murders. We've had one woman who was recently stabbed, 15, 20 times in the face. We've had a gay man who was recently decapitated, and his partner had his eyes gouged out. He was murdered as well. But we seem to have this catch-22 system where feminist Ireland can't seem to bring themselves to make the connection between immigration and culture and the increase in rape, where the argument that's put back against anybody who tries to discuss it, even rationally, it's a case, Irish men rape too. And again, they seem to miss the point that's trying to be made, that there are cultures, granted it may be biological, every man may potentially be a rapist because each man has that ability to do it. Why somebody would want to do it is a mystery, but we have this problem with certain cultures that are arriving into Ireland that don't really see this as an issue, don't respect women in the same way that Western society does. They can't have the conversation around it, because to have the conversation around that is to be, again, labelled a racist. And it seems bizarre, because ultimately it's going to be women who are affected, and a lot of men in Ireland feel that really we'll just leave women alone, because there is that feeling of, okay, well, we've been shat on for the last 20 or 30 years, and there is a real and imminent threat to you. And a lot of men would probably shrug their shoulders and go, okay, well, you didn't really need or want us, so deal with that by yourself. I don't know if you've recognized that phenomenon in your part of the world, but I would imagine immigration isn't confined to Ireland at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there are significant cultural differences. Like, what is the point of the feminist project if we don't acknowledge that cultural differences exist, and that our goal is to try to change the culture we're in? So we have to be willing to admit that there's significant differences between different cultures, and that some cultures are more and less feminist, more and less egalitarian, supportive of women, more and less patriarchal, more and less matrifocal, matriarchal. Like it's be different, and it's about the cultural propaganda and attitudes that are passed on in the home, and then in the religious communities, especially. I lived in Turkey, which is a secular Muslim country, for several months. I had a generally a very positive experience. But there's a lot of countries in that part of the world I would never go to, because it would be entirely unpredictable how I would be treated. And I do think that there's a lot of people who maybe they've never traveled that extensively, or maybe they just don't have that much exposure, and they want to be like a good leftist, a good progressive. They want to be tolerant, and they want to believe that all cultures are created equal, but they're fundamentally not. And that's why we work to improve the culture we're in, is because we know it's not what it could be. And that applies to other cultures too. So we have to be realistic about that. I don't know too much about the crime statistics, but I do know that some ideologies are very focused on conquest. And so the question is, if they're attacking women who are not wearing the garments, and they're attacking gay people in particular, and what is the real goal here? For how are they trying to perfect Irish culture? Let me put it that way. It's not their tolerance for other cultures is not necessarily reciprocated. So that's another reason let's try to not just be politically correct when you talk about these issues, and really recognize that if you want to, in my opinion, minimize the tendency of men to behave this way, you have to actively propagandize them from a young age about this. And if you're not doing that, then they're going to have to reinvent the wheel on their own, and some of them are going to do that by assaulting people when that could have been perhaps prevented. Because that's the idea. It's like we propagandize children on a wide variety of things in order to prevent them from doing harmful things. We teach them not to steal. We teach them not to kill, and we also teach them, or should teach them, not to violate other people's bodily autonomy, not to sexually violate them. And if you're in a culture that teaches rather the entitlement towards women's bodies rather than teaching respect for women's bodies, yeah, you're going to increase the like it's an optimization problem. So you have a degree that's nature that explains why it's always mostly males who are predators across cultures, and then you have a degree that's nurture, which is the part that you can affect with cultural propaganda and with changing how you talk about women.
Okay. So is this a project for mothers then? Because what always struck me about the criticism of men, most of us spend the majority of our time with our mothers, and I know there's a lot of links to sociopathy and psychopaths, especially serial killers, that their mother. And I say mother. Do you hear the way I said mother there? Like it's obvious I have problems with my own mother, but a lot of these guys have issues with their mother, and we do. Like my childhood, it was mostly my mother, and I'm not unique in that. Especially in Ireland, it would be the majority of kind of moral.
Yeah, my mom stayed home with
teaching.
me.
Yeah, comes from the mother and the teachers as well. 98% of our teachers in primary and secondary school at this stage are female, as well. So we are, by and large, mostly instructed by women, and I think that's why there is a real respect in Ireland for women, and I think amongst men for women as well.
Yeah.
And I don't know,
it's like Afghanistan, where the first thing they do is to ban girls from going to school and leaving the house and having occupations. So it's about what women are able to do in the culture. So it's one thing to be taught by your mother, but if you see your father then come home and hit your mother, what does that teach? That's a deeper lesson. So how much authority and power and control are women actually given? So you have some indigenous cultures in for instance, New York, one have read about a lot, et cetera, and influenced my mother. And anyway, so it's a product of like the assimilation project, things like that. But it's in that situation, the way it worked was that women stayed with their mother's family, and they would live in longhouses. And so when they got married, for instance, the man left his family's home and he went to stay with the woman and her mother's longhouse family, multifamily dwelling. And there was never a situation where the man could come between the woman and her kids and their housing. And so that's just like a different setup. Whereas the situation in some places, women are not allowed to own property. And so in both situations, the woman is likely to be the primary teacher because that's just biological. The child, and then you're most closely attached to the child because the child's been hearing your voice and feeling your feelings and your changes of state. And you've been connected for months and months. And I've never personally experienced this, but it's we know that babies have a strong preference for their mother's voice very soon after birth. There's a connection there and a desire to be connected to that, and it's very psychologically damaging to be separated from that when you're young. or to have that be a toxic relationship. It's harmful. And so I would just comment that, yeah, it's not just about who's doing the teaching or what they're teaching. It's about whether the teacher has power, whether the child can see that the teacher has power or the mother has power, whether she has authority and can protect him or her. And if the child sees that the mother can't protect them because the mother's powerless, that's very scary.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I think it promotes anger. I think it's natural for a child to be angry that the mother is not as all powerful as they want them to be.
Okay, I just wonder how. Sorry, say again. I didn't catch that.
And then that anger may then blossom into rage against women in adulthood. If you're a man from a culture that systematically suppresses and violates women, including mothers.
So, you know, the old trope, you know, it's a man's world. So looking to the future, do you think, like, if the roles were reversed, if we have a world that is, say, run by women, would it be a better world?
Only if it shared power with men. I think that's the only way you could have a stable system where women were considered to be the highest authority. In analogously to in a patriarchy where men are seen as fundamentally like the highest authority. To both cultures can approach egalitarianism, but they're approaching it from the different directions. But fundamentally, you know, we have to live together. We have to cooperate, and we have to have a system that ensures that children have a stable and supportive early childhood, especially. And that means that we have to support women and mothers and make sure that men who want to hurt them because they're angry at them for some reason can't actually disrupt the mother-child bond, can't actually like there just needs to be stability for the sake of the well-being of children.
Okay, and how would we know when we get there? That's always something that worries me, because I look around in this country and I see at least the opportunity to access, you know, levels of power, let's call it, are pretty equal. So the question arises, well, what does, you know, victory, let's call it that, what does victory look like, or how do we know when we get there, or can we, or is it just one of those never-ending projects that can't be quantified, you know?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'm not sure that a truly like a historically patriarchal, deeply culturally patriarchal, like, and I say that not just in terms of like who's in power, but like in terms of attitudes of like which kind of human is the default human. And so in a patriarchal culture, male is default, and that just really affects everyone's attitudes, because women are seen as ancillary, secondary, dependent in some way. Whereas in a culture where women are seen as default, then men are seen as more ancillary, and there's more focus on women and their role in reproducing society, and the need for the benefit of everyone to protect and uplift mothers. So I don't know if you can actually cross that divide. I think you can both approach egalitarianism, but I don't know if that cultural attitude can truly be shifted on a mass scale. I do think individuals can get there themselves to where they start to see the fact that there's two kinds of fundamental humans, and both kinds of humans are default. No one human is more default than the other. Women and men are both default humans. We're both different. So you need to have a model where one is not a variation on the other. And I think right now the biggest challenge to the feminist project is trans ideology, gender ideology, trying to reinforce that women and men are somehow a variation on each other. And in a patriarchal context, that means women are a variation on men, but it also means that men can acquire womanhood through acquiring pieces of women.
Sorry, I just had a terrible thought, a terrible joke. The question was, who came first, the man or woman? And it's obvious it's nearly always men who come first, you know. So sorry to bring the tone.
He does this all the time.
I had to get it out just before, you know.
It's always better to come most.
There you go. That's a better option. Okay. Yeah, that's answered all my questions, really. Unless Howard has anything to add, I'll stay quiet and refrain from terrible jokes.
No, I find this a very engaging conversation. I like where we came. So, for fuck's
Yeah,
sake.
I tried. That wasn't me. I held it in. Like,
Come on now.
Oh, God. Right. So we've come to this place in Western civilization where we're contemplating this man for woman, woman for man, blah, blah, blah. Is this the final boss of feminism?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I think that there's still many other bosses because there's like there's whole other entities that want to oppress women in new and exciting ways. But I do think it's the current final boss, and whether the game continues after this or whether we're at the last level of Tetris and it's just gonna start glitching. I don't know. But I do think that there's an intrinsic motivation where the state, the apparatus of the state, wants to control and regulate things like wants to control and regulate reproduction fundamentally. And I think that that's true whether women or men control it, because it's an important thing for the state to consider, because it's necessary for long-term stability. But I think that when it's more patriarchal, the focus is also on regulating insemination opportunities, I call them, for men, and structuring that. And so you end up with the extreme version of that is like, Afghanistan, where who gets to sleep with who is extremely regulated and enforced through control of women. But I think that that's something that's going to keep reemerging, because the issue of are women having enough babies keeps being a concern for the state, and it's not a good thing to not have enough babies. But I don't think the answer that a lot of states seem to be coming up with is forcing women. And I think the answer would just be, making it so that women have housing and economic support and access to all the support that they need to have children. Because I think that fundamentally, people want to have families. In my generation, a lot of people have been putting it off because the economic support is not there.
have you had that desire to have a child, or do you have children?
I do not have children. I have at times wanted to, but I don't know when it's going to happen. I have some medical issues too that I'd be worried about.
All right. Maybe we can look forward to
it.
Yeah. I'm just thinking maybe if we look forward to a dystopian future, like Brave New World, we can take that burden away from women. We can have hatcheries where we can go and collect our children, and so we can be more. Say again.
Oh, that if you do too much direct payments for women to have kids, then you might end up with the wrong women, the women you don't want, because that's the other issue, is like which women are having kids, and what that's going to do. So it's complicated, and I feel like where you have more direct support for like the necessities, things like childcare, state funded childcare. That would be a way of supporting women and having children that wouldn't necessarily make it a fee for service kind of situation like it is with surrogacy.
Say that again, though. I didn't catch the last part. Sorry.
Oh, so rather than transfer payments to women, like some governments have tried that, where they just pay women for every kid they have. Mm-hmm. Having that's kind of like a fee for service, similar to surrogacy, like you're paying them to have the children directly.
Oh, yeah.
And that can end up with either too many kids or too many kids coming from people that probably shouldn't be having kids, but they have nothing else to contribute. So there's a lot of questions of how to support and encourage the appropriate amount of reproduction from an appropriately diverse group of people in the society. But yeah, I feel like they don't want to do that.
Yeah, we have that issue here as well. So part of the immigration debate we're not having here is because birth rates are so low. So from an economic level, on one level, we do need inward immigration, but we've had a campaign over 20 years advising people not to have children. It's not the best thing to do for planet. And of course, you mentioned the economic factors. let's be honest, the only people who are having children at the moment in the Western world are those who are extremely poor or those who are extremely wealthy, or those who are completely stupid. I'm in that category. I haven't had them, but I've been involved in the making of 5 of them. And for most people, it's not really an option purely because of the economics. Most people get by day to day, but we have this mind fuck of, don't have children, don't have children, don't have children. But we don't have enough people for the next 30 years, so we need to import, 25% more who will have children, and then they expect the national population not to get upset, and then conspiracy theories arise that it's population replacement, which it is. But of course, we no longer live in the days where women are expected to have babies. I think that's a reasonable expectation because we can't do it. I don't think we would as men if we could. And it seems like an awful fucking experience to me. I've been there at a few of them, and I can understand if I was a woman and had to do that, I would be disgusted. Like,
well, there's
really
so much shame too. Like, there's so much shaming of women. Like we're like you said, like and that affected me too when I was younger, more so than now, because now I kind of think it's silly, but the idea that like that's what I'm doing to reduce my carbon footprint is not have kids. Like, what an absurd thing. It's necessary for life, for people to reproduce, and then there's also the shame of like, well, why did you have kids if you can't afford it? The idea that like you're actually making your children's lives worse by not being a perfect parent who's perfectly stable before you have it, and not having that confidence, like that if you need help is going to be there, support is going to be there. Well, my generation, like, and the economics are a factor here too. Like, people, maybe it's also my region. There's not really an emphasis on marriage. There's not really an emphasis on fidelity within a relationship, and it seems like you're on the cutting edge of the future when you're young, and then 15 years go by, and you're like, oh, did I sell my birthright for a bowl of soup there?
Right, maybe. I see. I think the issue is like we've had a system for millennia that we've worked with where women were expected to have children and men had a traditional role. Obviously, for a lot of people that was tyrannical to live under that, where that's it. That's all that's expected of you. Like, that's your role in life, is to pop out children for the future and stay at home and be sex objects. But I think we're at the other end of that spectrum now, where nobody wants to have children because they're seen as a burden, really, to a lifestyle. And to be honest, they are. Once you have children, your old lifestyle is gone. It's now essentially about looking after the children, and for women, that is a bigger burden. Be that if it's naturally designed that way or not. I'm just thinking how to correct that or to interfere in that model. We can't know what the consequences are long term. If we think we have, say, two trans people who can, go and contact somebody, a surrogate, and have a child, and that child is now we've commoditized children. It's perfectly legal in this country to go to Ukraine,
traumatize them.
Purchase a child. So we'll have a generation of children that grow up in that environment, and that's just another fucking nightmare, because there is this notion that all children need is love, and which to my mind is a very dangerous premise, because you want to start defining love. I'm just concerned that if we tinker around with the fundamental building blocks of society, that we may well collapse it in on itself, even if it is for the right reasons,
Yeah, and societies collapse sometimes.
Yeah, I think we're closer than we'd like to admit. At least that's how it seems from this vantage point in Ireland. So I'm just not sure what the future holds, if we can ever reach that level of egalitarianism. If it's wise, even if it's wise to have men in charge of childcare, and if that is the case, if the burden is to be shared equally, or if men should take up more of the burden of raising children, in effect, isn't that an admission of failure from women, or is it truly just that burdensome? And And is it dull? Is it just a dull existence of a life of just, screaming arseholes for 18 to 20 years of your life?
I think there's a lack of support. People have kids often and they don't have a working model of what development is and how to support development, because that education may not be accessible to them because it doesn't seem to be very emphasized in the high school curriculum, even though it's so important, I think, to understand like what is development, what are the stages of development, how to what's normal at different ages, how do you like you can't accelerate it past what it would naturally be, but you can get it to what its optimal level is. And so if you don't have a model of what's normal, then you might think that you're failing if your child is struggling, or if your child is not developing at a rate you would expect. And some parents will seek out professional support, like someone like me, where I can give them feedback about like what's normal and what's not normal for like speech and language development, social thinking development. But a lot of people like are winging it, and that's a struggle, and you can end up in these toxic dynamics where you might jump straight to yelling just because that's worked in the past, and you're both kind of don't have the insight into how to shift patterns. And then of course it's normal, or it's common, I shouldn't say it's normal, but it's common for traumas to strike families that have already been started and really shift the dynamics, and there isn't necessarily a lot of support and access to family therapy in the wake of those situations, and that causes so much trauma and so much loss of productivity too. And if you're a child in that situation, it can really put you off wanting to have your own kids too, because you don't want to make anybody else go through what you went through. But really then you might go through treatment and therapy and realize, what I went through really did hurt, but I'm different from that, and I would have the tools that I would need in that kind of situation. But by that point, you might be later point in your life, and so I just feel like there needs to be more just more access to mental health services, including family therapy, and more access to education for parents, not just when they mess up and then it's a punishment, but like just offer it. So I don't know how we get there. And then the other thing is that I want to comment on too is that there's movements within medicine now to try to say that we need to queer pregnancy. And the implication of that is that we should allow women to continue taking testosterone, a known teratogen, during their pregnancy, and just let whatever happens, on the idea that like we're being like sexist, but against trans people. If we don't want to expose a female fetus to a hormone that will affect her development.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I think the question on how do we get there, I think that obviously there's needs for support. There's always needs for support. I think historically that would have been gotten from a larger community, in smaller populations. I just don't have.
Churches actually have a place, I feel like, and that they've kind of like people don't have churches, and I'm not a deeply religious person, but I think that churches and church-like organizations have a crucial role here too. Charity, like personal charity from social groups that are outside of governmental organizations. When I was in high school and college and graduate school, I was always trying to have like a skeptics club, a secular club for people that didn't have churches due to lack of religious beliefs, because it's so important to have a social support network.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think the state can provide that, and I think people have lost faith in the state at this stage, that even for the state to intervene in it can only be seen as toxic. We're at such a state in this country now that the government could come out with legislation tomorrow that would free the entire population forever and never have to struggle, and the people would naturally say, no, we don't trust you, fuckers, an inch.
I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you're right. It has to come from some sort of a church organization. But again, how we get there, I don't know. But we simply can't ignore it. And I'm very happy
a
that these people.
lifespan attitude.
Say again.
There needs to be an attitude of the lifespan. So it's not just about what you want now and what you think you need now. It's about what you're going to want and need in 20, 30 years, like the ability to reproduce.
Yeah, I think we're well capable of the species of actually doing that, you know, if we can all get past the horrible ideology and the nonsense and just talk frankly to each other and not worry too much about offending each other. And that's what I noticed about you. It was kind of amazing. You seem you can talk with anybody. You don't get flustered. You're particularly open and honest and frank, and that's rare. And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be rare at all. And so I'm delighted that you come on and you spoke to us and you graced to Irish peasants with your presence. It's really fascinating. I hope we can talk to you again. I'm sure this isn't.
I love this conversation.
Yeah, me too, and it's refreshing because even just for a woman to talk to us, a lot of women don't talk to us. Don't read too much into that, but we like honest, frank conversations, which to me are pretty easy. Really, once you drop the nonsense and you don't get easily offended, and I think that's the way it should be going forward. That we all have the same experience, which is life and trying to fucking deal with it. And I think we should be as nice as possible to each other so we can kind of come to an understanding that, yes, we all live it. We all fucking suffer. Why anybody would want to be a man is a mystery to fucking me. I'm sure women would say the same thing, why anybody would want to be a woman, because let's face it, there is a lot of suffering involved for everybody. And that's probably one thing that people can share in is, unfortunately, the suffering and the joy, of course. But the suffering just seems to be more memorable. So maybe if we can save people from some unnecessary suffering, that we might have done some good in the world. And I'm delighted that there are people like you out there, because you people will listen because you are of it. You've experienced it, and I think that's what I'll take from this the most. That it's going to be people like you and detransitioners, who are going to essentially win this battle, because you can't argue against the truth, and you can't argue against someone's experience, especially if they're logical and calm and rational. And for a woman as well, like, to have those qualities is amazing. I have to say, that's another joke.
I think you have to really be willing to meet people where they're at, if you want to get them to where you are. And that is a skill. That is definitely a skill. As a clinician, I had to develop that skill. Going into a room, I don't know this person. I'm going to talk to them. They might think that I'm someone I'm not, because I worked around a lot of dementia, for instance. And so I learned to roll with the punches. I learned to, sometimes literally, I learned to figure out how to adjust and how to diffuse tension and how to bring the temperature of the conversation a little bit back down, and try to refocus and be able to state things logically in a simple way that even somebody who's very cognitively impaired, they might be able to hear me, because that's my goal, is just to be heard.
Perfect. I think you just called me cognitively impaired there, or that's my lack of self-confidence.
You're male.
All right. Well, there we go. Fair enough. I can't be argued with. So have pity for us. It's not.
You
easy
do have some cognitive advantages over females, though, most likely. So it's not all bad. We're all impaired, and we're all both impaired and advantaged by our sex. And I think we need to come to
the clusterfuck for everybody involved. But hopefully someone will figure it out eventually.
Keeps coming.
Show us that forward. Yeah, it never ends. I know you don't believe in a God, but God forbid there is a reincarnation. We have to do all this shit over and over again until we get it right. I know, yeah, right. But genuinely, thank you. I'm delighted you come on. I will be following you. I know that sounds like a threat, but it's not. It's a good thing. And I'm delighted.
He followed me, but he didn't comment or anything. And I was like, "Why are you following me?" And he's like, "Yeah, friends." And I'm like, "Oh, great."
Yeah, but no, it's great, and it gives me hope. We look at events in the world on a weekly basis, like you and everyone else, I'm sure, and it's hard not to be fucking depressed out of your mind. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for giving us hope.
Thank you.
And it's great guys like you, and I hope we talk to you in the future again. And good luck with everything. Where can people find you if they want to follow you? Twitter, Facebook. Who should they look for exactly?
Oh, I'm all over the place. TT Exulansic is a good term to use. I derived the term Exulansic from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, from the word Exulansis. So I don't think really anyone who was using it before me. A couple people I've noticed since then, but reading it. But yeah, so it's usually that will point to me on whatever platform. Most of my videos, the largest collection of my videos rather, are on Odyssey and Rumble, and I'm also on Twitter, and my essays are on Substack, along with videos from February 2022 on, which is when the Substack started. So older videos are on Rumble and Odyssey, and then everything else is on Substack. And you can, it prompts you to have a paid membership when you go to the Substack, but it's you can just do it for free, and everything eventually becomes free after a few weeks usually. So it's if you want early access, there's the subscriptions, but and that would be exulansic.substack.com.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll put some links on our website and drive people over there. So thank you again. Enjoy your day. It's Good Friday. I don't know if that means anything to you. We used to be a Catholic country here, so have a good Friday. Beyond that,
yeah, we did that with I was a Lutheran at one point, so we would celebrate Good Friday as well.
All right. Oh God, Jesus Christ! Not bad enough.
I've been all over the place.
A Lutheran as well. Now you have my sympathy.
Thank you. All right, we'll take care.
You very much.
Thank you so
It's
much.
been lovely.
You too. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Wow. I saw that going way worse than it actually did.
You're such an optimist. Jesus Christ. I've just won the lotto. It's better than I'm going to be disappointed. Fuck me. That was great. That was wonderful. One.
Yeah. She's so affable and easy to get along with, as in other words. I don't know why I was so afraid.
Because you're a fanboy, you know. No, you're just worried I'm going to make embarrass both of us. I have that pretty well. But right, let's stop for some fucking music. Do we have any? I need to have a cup of tea and take these earphones off my ears.